listening to the best of the Martha Zoller Show. To hear the full show each day, tune in to AM 550 and FM 102.9 WDUN or log in to accesswdun.com and click the Listen Live button from 9 to 11 Monday through Friday. Joseph Kirk is here with us right now. He's an election administrator with a history of conducting secure and transparent elections. He started out his career supporting Georgia's first statewide voting system from 2002 to 2005. He accepted his current position as election supervisor of Bartow County in Georgia. He graduated from the University of Georgia as a degree in computer science. And, he serves on the executive board of the Georgia Association of Voter Registration and Registrars and Election Officials. Joseph, welcome to the program.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, we've had a lot of questions from folks about what has recently happened at the state election board, but also just kind of what is entailed in local elections and how we make them secure. And I just thought you got recommended to me by several people as being the person to talk to, so I'm so thankful that you're with me today.
I'm just so happy to be here. I appreciate you giving me the opportunity.
So tell us about what you do, and then let's talk about the state election board.
So what I do day to day, my actual job for Bartow County is I'm the department head in charge of voter registration and elections. I serve a 5-member board, 2 from the Democratic Party, 2 from the Republican Party, and the chairperson is appointed by the grand jury. But the day-to-day operations of the department, the poll worker training, the hiring, staffing, all the work that goes into election is done by myself, my staff, and the board operates like the school board. They come in once a month or whenever we need them for a meeting, make the big decisions, give me directives, and then I implement their decisions.
So recently, let's go back to Senate Bill 202 because we had the 2020 election, and as a result of that and some things that happened related to the 2020 election and other things, changes that needed to be made. I mean, I would argue we probably should have added ID to absentee ballots back in 2006 when we added ID to everything else, but that was something that happened in Senate Bill 202. So we had Senate Bill 202 that was passed in 2021, and we've had several elections since then. In your mind, have those been secure elections?
I would say that every election ever conducted has been a secure election. And in fact, we take some additional steps in Bartow County, for example, and this doesn't go into absentee balloting as much, but we do a 100% hand count of one race as a post-election audit for every election we conduct. They've always come back clean. So I'm very satisfied with our elections.
So recently, the state election board made some changes in the rules. Can you explain that process?
Absolutely. I think the first thing to say about the rulemaking process is that it's very different than the legislative process. When you're looking at bills and how they become a law, at any point in that process, there can be small changes, amendments, and it's a constant work right until the time that it hits the House or Senate floor. With the state election board, a rule takes at least a month, usually a month and a half, 2 months to pass, because it's submitted by the public as a petition, has to be posted on the website, and then the petitioner presents it to the state election board at one of their meetings, and if they choose to begin the rulemaking process, that rule is posted online for 30 days, and nothing can be changed at that point. So if there's an issue, if there's an amendment issue made, it takes an additional at least 30 days to make that amendment. And unfortunately, a lot of this process started in July, so we're running short on time getting all this stuff done.
And so what rules were put into place in the most recent board?
So recently, we've had 3 rules that have passed. One is that, I'm sorry, I'm looking at my notes here. We have to keep video of an empty drop box overnight, or record video of an empty drop box overnight to be sure nobody messes with it. and then retain the video of the empty box for 24 months, and also creates a new procedure for accepting absentee ballots that are delivered by hand, which, unfortunately, in my opinion, goes against current state law. The law is very clear on how ballots are returned, what happens once they're returned, and the situations where we reject the ballot. This rule would require that the person delivering the ballot has to show a photo ID, establish a relationship to the voter. I'm not saying that's a bad idea, but right now in the law, we can't reject a ballot because of how it was delivered, as long as everything's right with the ballot itself. We can turn the person in who delivered it, but not reject the ballot itself. There is a rule that creates some new certification procedures where my board will have to meet at 3 o'clock the Friday after the election, before all the ballots have been decided for provisional ballots, before military ballots come back in potentially, things like that, and start a comparison process. It's required by law anyway. And it just sort of makes us start earlier with that. It also gives the board a little bit more authority, or implies authority to determine, in my opinion, to determine which votes to count if there's a discrepancy. Unfortunately, the practical reality is once the ballots are counted, they're anonymous. We can't tell whose ballot is whose, so I'm not sure how that's going to work. And then there's been a third one that talks about a reasonable inquiry prior to certification. There's been a lot of talk about that. I'm not very concerned about that. I think most counties already go through that process. If not the individual board members, the office staff or the board as a whole. But every election I conduct afterwards, the most important work I do happens after election day. We're going through every piece of paper, verifying the numbers balanced in so many different ways, looking into incidents and complaints from the public, employee issues, you name it. And when our board meets to certify, I give them a report, what went right, what went wrong, recommendations on provisional ballots, things like that. So when they certify, they have the complete picture in front of them. And that act of certification isn't saying that the election was perfect. No election's ever perfect. But it's indicating they're done with their part of the process with their role, and we're ready to send the results to the state to be aggregated on the state level as the next step and get ready for our post-election audit. But either way, like I said, reasonable inquiry is not one of my concerns. And then there's, I think, 11 other rules that are posted right now on the website that will be determined, I believe, on September 20th, possibly 20th, 21st.
And my concern about that is it's awfully close to the election if you're putting new rules in place on the 20th of September. And I think there has to be a reasonable cutoff to where you can't make changes in the rules. That just seems to me from the outside looking in.
Well, and it's interesting you say that. I completely agree. And one of the rules that's posted right now it discusses using tracking services when we send ballots out. It requires us to use a common carrier that has tracking, not necessarily to use the tracking, but when the state election board meets, my office will have already issued ballots for 3 days for the upcoming election. So I'm not sure how that rule is going to work when we're already issuing ballots.
Yeah, and do you expect, is it your experience with the state election board, if they have proposed rules, that they generally pass them?
Well, this is a very different state election board we've seen in the past. Before, say, last year, the rulemaking process was pretty boring. There weren't a lot of rules presented from the public. Most of the rules that passed were rules that were sort of workshopped ahead of the meeting. And now we're seeing most of we're talking about half the rules that are presented by the public passing are always being posted for rulemaking. And we're still getting used to the new state election board. Now, one thing I should mention is part of the process when a rule is posted for rulemaking is it's sent to different agencies on the state level, legislative council, I think the Secretary of State's office, Attorney General's office, so they know what's going on. And those offices may respond with concerns, but I think in most cases look at it, and if they don't have any huge concerns, they're not going to send anything back. But no response is not necessarily an indication of approval.
So we're talking to Joseph Kirk. He is the election supervisor for Bartow County, but he has a long history in election security. And we're going to be talking to him until the bottom of the hour. But a gentleman has texted in by the name of William who said, while he was on his voter page this year, my voter page this year, he discovered that his 2020 vote was not counted. While this is disheartening, I will still continue to vote. But how do we stop this from continuing and ensure that people have confidence in the democratic process? So if someone can go onto my voter page and see if their vote has been counted, I wasn't even aware of that.
So, William, it's a great question. I'm glad you brought it up. What's on the My Voter page is your credit for voting, not an indication whether or not your vote counted. There's two different sides of elections. There's voter registration, where we track where you live, your eligibility, your voting history, which elections you participated in, in a primary, which party did you select, things like that. But your vote on the election side doesn't interact with your name or your identity in any way. We separate that intentionally so your vote's anonymous. So the way I normally explain this, especially when folks vote in person, is, you go into the poll, you're checked in, you go to the machine, mark your ballot, print your ballot, review your ballot, and that's a very important step to review that it says what you want to say, because we're going to audit that after the election, and I'll say something more about that later. But then you're going to go up to the scanner and feed it in the scanner yourself. And when you do that, you're counting your own vote. Because at that moment is when your vote's recorded, and once that ballot falls in the box, you see the number increments, it says ballot cast. There's no getting that ballot back, and even if we discover there was something wrong, you shouldn't have been checked in, that vote's still been counted, and we can't back it out.
Right. So what would he have been, I'm going to go on my voter page during the break and just kind of see if I can see what he was looking at that made him think that his vote wasn't counted. So, yeah.
If I had to guess, I would maybe vote during advance voting in 2020. And that was fairly chaotic during, the pandemic. We had less employees, different rules in place we had to follow. Folks were calling out, and just because they issued you a card because of the way systems worked back then doesn't necessarily mean they saved the transaction.
Right.
And we put new procedures in place since then to be sure we have that information retained, to make it easier for the poll workers not to juggle multiple systems. It's very streamlined now, and I'm very happy we have that. It'll make this year a lot easier, actually. But back then, you could vote, cast a ballot, and potentially the poll worker might make a mistake. It happens, and not save that transaction on the voter registration side of things. So if you remember scanning your ballot in the scanner yourself, that vote counted. And I'm sorry your credit's not appearing on my voter page, but we are, as I said, putting things in place. We're always trying to improve to make sure it doesn't happen again.
There's obviously still a lot of concern out there about voting and whether it's secure. And there's certain factions in the Republican Party and the Democratic Party that likes to whip people up to say that the elections are not secure. Mm-hmm. So what would you say to folks about, if they have questions, how they should pursue them so that they can get the best answers?
Well, before I answer that, one point I'd like to make is one of the things I think that's hurting the process is the idea of how hard can it be. Our friend calls it how hard can it be-ism. We never teach children in school about the voting process. We talk about the history of the country, the suffrage movements, all those things, but never the nuts and bolts of how registration works, what their rights and their responsibilities are, to let us, for example, at least know when they move, or anything like that. So we don't talk about how the election is secured or the safeguards are in place there. So if we never tell anybody how this works, how can we expect them to know? I'm really hoping the next couple of years we see a bill out of the legislature to try to help with that through the high schools, and see that knowledge trickle out in the communities. But for right now, until we have a tool like that, my suggestion is to call your local elections office. We love to talk about this stuff, and I can tell you my family's tired of hearing about it. So please, call us, and we'll be happy to answer the questions. But I think one example here is I had a call last year from someone who moved to Florida, She was calling me to be sure that, no one was voting in her name. If she was still, am I still on the list? Is anybody using my record to vote? And it's not uncommon for folks to have a registration record on a different state's list because no one thinks to tell the registration office when they move, but no one had voted in her name. I went back, I checked, I sent her the report, but I asked her how she thought it happened, and she really thought that to cast an absentee ballot, cast a ballot through the mail, all you had to do was go online, print a ballot out, and drop it in a drop box, and it was automatically counted. And once I explained to her that, you have to apply for a ballot first. And when you apply, we check your eligibility and your identity with your personal information, with your signature, to be sure that it's you we're dealing with. And then we issue a ballot. When we get that ballot back, no matter how it's received, whether it's through the mail, through a drop box, somebody walks it into us, we're going to, again, verify that person's eligibility and identity before we ever decide to count that ballot. If there's anything wrong with it, there's a process we go through to cure it. We have to do a sworn affidavit to say, yes, that was me. Here's the right information. But it really surprised her how much work went into confirming a vote through the mail to make sure people aren't using other people's identities. So, again, I hope everybody feels comfortable calling their local election office, getting the information that you need. Don't get it from social media. There's a lot of ideas there that aren't necessarily based on how the law works. But that's my recommendation.
Yeah, I do think look, I tend to feel like elections are secure. Now, I'm a political scientist. I have a master's in American politics. And one of the things, and I went back to school in my 50s because my kids had all gone to school, and I always wanted to do that. And there are probably 5 elections in our history, presidential elections in our history, where there have been significant amount of questions. 1896, 1920, 1960, 2000, and 2020. And in the case of 1960, for example, a lot of scholars have gone back and looked at that one and said, yeah, there were some big problems there that may have impacted the outcome. But the way I look at it is we have a constitution with a process that makes sure that we still go on as a nation and that we have the ability to change things if we need to. So that's what I look for. But Joseph Kirk, this was so helpful today, but we have a lot more to talk about. So we are going to get you back another time, and we look forward to all the work you do for Bartow County and for our state. Thank you very much.
I look forward to chatting with you again. Have a great day.
It's where North Georgia comes to talk. It's the Martha Zoller Show on AM 550 and FM 102.9 WDUN.
Bill Crane is here with me today for Crane's Corner. We always get together and talk about Georgia politics. And, before we get into this South Georgia swing, which according to Patricia Murphy at the AJC is the first South Georgia swing by a presidential candidate since Bubba for Georgia, which was Bill Clinton going through South Georgia with Sam Nunn in 1992. I don't remember Bubba for Georgia, the campaign, but, I was busy with kids at that point in time. But let's talk about the state election board right now. Can you before we get into that, talk to me about kind of where we are with the state election board.
Martha, I know that I'm probably in the minority among people who lean conservative, but I think the 3-member voting majority on the board is overstepping the appropriate role of state election boards and 4 local election boards. Their role is ministerial and meaning at the local county level after an election occurs. On election day, the election employees are tabulating absentee, early voting, and drop box ballots, flattening them, scanning them, and then ready to push for the results that usually drop around 8 p.m., an hour after the polls close. At the precincts, then, those machines, after the polls close at 7, the same exercise occurs, and trained poll workers, there's about 100,000 of them, scan the ballots. And in a presidential election, that'll be about 5 million ballots at around 3,000 precincts across Georgia. And then those results are rechecked, the math, and sent to the county level. And there's a board of elections as well as an election superintendent, and they redo the math to make sure how many people showed up at the polls, how many people were registered, how many ballots were cast, how many ballots were spoiled, how many provisional ballots were cast, and here's the tallies. And then those tallies go into the Secretary of State's office. there are several rule changes, but the one that I think is of most concern, or two actually, one allows a single Board of Elections member to delay certification by requesting any document relative to the election process, registration records, precinct sign-in sheets, tabulation sheets from the precinct level, and actually to inspect ballots, which is really problematic for me because they're paper. They get wet, they get soiled, they get torn. It's very difficult later to tabulate a QR code. Secondly, the same standard, one member of an election board can ask for any reasonable inquiry to kind of review what happened before they sign off on certification. The old standard was a majority of the election board, there are 5 members, must vote to certify, which would be 3 in a group of 5. I am concerned, even though state law says that all of Georgia's results need to be certified by the 17th, and all of the results need to be certified from the counties to the state by the Monday following the election. If you tie up a large county like Fulton, which has 1 million ballots in it, or DeKalb County, which is where some of the concerns are with 750 to 800,000 ballots cast typically, you're not going to have the state total to certify on the 17th, and if you can't report it out, and there's a federal law that ties into when the Electoral College is certified and the state Electoral College meets on the 5th of December, then the vote of Georgia in the presidential contest is decided by the U.S. House of Representatives. And perhaps in this case, the House being controlled by a Republican majority, that would be a good thing for Donald Trump. But I don't think gaming the system is the way to win elections.
Well, and I think it's getting too late to make any changes to how we're going to do things. I talked to an election member, a local election board member who said, we don't have the exact ballot yet because we don't have all the candidates straight yet.
Robert F. Kennedy just asked not to be on the ballot.
Yes. So it'll be interesting to follow. But we're going to keep following this closely. The Attorney General is going to weigh in soon. And I think we'll see a lot more on this. Now, let's talk politics. So Kamala Harris and Tim Walz are coming to Georgia, I think, tomorrow. And they're going to be doing a South Georgia swing, which that has not been done since 1992 in Georgia.
By Democrats. It's been done by Republicans.
By a Democrat.
Yeah. And they are here today, but yes.
Oh, they're here today. Good. Well,
yeah,
that's
the rally in Savannah is tomorrow.
Yes, that's what I thought. So they're not going to go everywhere in South Georgia. They'll go to Savannah. They'll go, to some other places. But, your thoughts about kind of where it is. She's finally going to sit down for an interview. It's not going to be a one-on-one. There's a staffer that's made a statement like, well, we can't let Tim Walz do an interview by himself yet because he's not up on her policies yet. Well, I don't think she's up on her policies yet. I mean, she's talking about a border wall now. So what are your thoughts? What are your thoughts?
First on the interview, it's an unusual crutch for a nominee of any party to include their running mate in the interview. And as I understand it, there have been 2 scheduled, both of which will take place in Georgia, one with CNN's Dana Bash and the other with the AJC's reporting team. But in both cases, it will be Vice President Harris and our running mate, Governor Tim Walz, which is just an odd construct, but that is what they're planning to do. As it relates to the effectiveness and the bus tour and what it says, I believe they can be competitive outstate. That didn't happen in 2020, didn't happen in 2022, didn't happen in the municipal elections. The Republican Party dominated most of Georgia outside of Metro Atlanta, with the exceptions of core cities like Macon, Savannah, Columbus, Albany, Augusta. But if you go to, as you live in Hall County, and you can remember when Democrats controlled Hall County, Nathan Deal was a Democrat until 1994, that visiting a community, particularly an underserved or a less visited community, can fire up the troops, can get voters activated, and can cause a swell in turnout. I just don't think the numbers are there for it to change the result in probably 120 or 130 of Georgia's 159 counties.
Yeah, I agree. I think that this is still Trump's state to win. I think this is still Trump's election to win. I mean, you heard Van Jones, of all people, say a few days ago that, she has had a perfect campaign for more than 30 days, almost 40 days, and had not done any interviews, have had no slip-ups from his perspective, and yet she's still only tied. I mean, yes, there's a few polls that show a little bit ahead, but in the swing states, it's all within the margin of error. It's
a closer race than it was when Joe Biden was the Democratic nominee. The debates are going to be critical. I think there's only going to be the one on September the 10th, which apparently is going to have the same rules as the earlier CNN debate. This won't be on ABC, and it's on the 10th of September, Tuesday night after Labor Day, or a week after Labor Day. I think for her, controlling opportunities like interviews, unscripted interactions with voters are going to be critical. I don't remember her doing all that well. I went back and looked against Mike Pence. She didn't fall apart, but she didn't, Mike Pence is not exactly the strongest orator in the world. It was sort of a flat performance. So I'm not sure how she will handle Donald Trump. But I also think you look at the states that are in contest and what the issues are there, and she's gotten closer by adopting some of Donald Trump's policies, like in Nevada, no tax on tips, which is very popular with a whole lot of different people, but if the media are honest and if we get debate questions that are straight, there needs to be, like you just talked about the border wall, there needs to be a point at which, this is where you were, this is where you voted, this is how you served in California and in the U.S. Senate. What made you do this now? And I think people do look for genuineness, whether you like Donald Trump or not. He's pretty consistent in who he is. And people look for leaders they believe are shooting straight. And I don't think that is what Vice President Harris represents for a lot of voters.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be a really, and I say, and it's not because I don't want to take a position, it's that we have had 10 years of political news in the last 8 weeks. And I don't know that anybody knows what's going to happen in the next 8 weeks. Okay? And
I don't.
We're going to have to take it day by day, and I think it's going to be a very interesting thing to see. But I think at the core of it, Bill, is that you have got people that, yes, if you have a 401k or you're about to retire, you're kind of inflation proof, not completely, but kind of. So you're not feeling it as much as the guy that is a truly middle class worker, that prices have gone up 20 or 22% in the last 4 years. And maybe your wages have gone up, but they haven't gone up 22%. And so you are still behind the 8 ball. You're paying more interest on credit cards. You're paying more interest for home loans if you've bought a home, if you can afford to buy a home. And those day-to-day things that are wealth building for the middle class, the way the middle class builds wealth is by buying homes, trading up with homes over time. That's how the middle class builds wealth.
45% capital gains tax, which is what the Democrats are proposing, wipes out that gain on the home.
Yes.
So I don't think there's been a lot of scrutiny or attention paid to the detail of what their platform. I mean, for all the talk about Project 2025, I've seen almost no content-based coverage of the Democratic Party platform or even the specifics of Ms. Harris's economic policies beyond those which she had, put forth at a press conference, like the $25,000 down payment for first-time home buyers. One, how do you determine actually who is a first-time home buyer? Let's say there's a married couple with one person having a home before and the other one not. Who's a first-time home buyer? And how do you decide who gets the $25,000? That's a lot of money. We're getting back into the
and let's be honest here, $25,000 is not a down payment on an average price home today.
No.
Okay,
not
so who's it going to help? There aren't homes out there that $25,000 is a down payment. Unless you're going to start doing subprime mortgages where you put 5% down again, and you know where that got us. Okay, that's got us into a big
I think,
problem.
again, it's theater. It's to
theater.
Look like you're trying to do something.
Absolutely. Bill Crane, thank you so much for being with us today. You can read Bill's columns at Access WDUN, and we look forward to talking to him every week. To hear the full versions of last week's Martha Zoller shows, go to the podcast page at accesswdun.com, and you can follow me on social media at Martha Zoller.